letting people in? Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our fall 2021 Boston University School of Social Work E&I Speaker Series event, co-sponsored with our macro department, Multiracial Feminist Democracy or Authoritarianism, the Crisis of Neoliberal Democracy and the Rise of Racial and Religious Nationalism with Tarso Luís Ramos. My name is Dawn Belkin Martinez, and I am the Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion and co-chair, along with Ellen Duveau, of our E&I committee, which includes all of our stakeholders, faculty, staff, students, administrators, and alum. The committee has been around for many years, engaging in the work of building equity, inclusion, and justice here at BUSSW, as well as amplifying social justice-focused activities here in the community. Some of the work we have engaged in includes organizing social justice learning communities, creating social justice-focused case consultations, partnering with different departments around social justice-focused interventions, student support and solidarity circles, and a field department social justice seminar. We also have a wonderful resource page available to anyone that includes podcasts, peer-reviewed literature, and media articles that I encourage everyone to check out. Finally, we have just completed a three-hour online module on structural and institutional racism. You can access many of these resources at our Equity and Inclusion webpage. I'm going to briefly review our format today. I will introduce Tarso and he will present for about 30 minutes. We will then have 3 members of our BUSSW community offer a short reflection about the talk and ask Tarso a question. Finally, we will be able to answer a few questions from our audience that you can type into the chat. Before we begin, I would like to review a few Zoom housekeeping items. Number 1, anyone who is receiving CEUs will need to keep their camera on during the entire session. If you are not receiving CEUs, we recommend turning the camera off during Tarso's talk. If you are receiving CEUs, you will need to complete the evaluation form. Lauren will type the link to the evaluation form in the chat at the end of the presentation. We suggest having your Zoom setting on speaker's view. We will be recording the presentation, so if you aren't comfortable being recorded and you aren't receiving CEUs, please keep your camera off during the entire event. We will be posting the recording on our E&I Speaker Series page a few days after the talk. Please do not use the chat during Tarso's presentation, as that can be distracting for the speaker. Closed captioning is available for the presentation. To use closed captions, you need to click on the closed caption button and choose Show Subtitles for the captions to overlay on your screen. We'd like to begin our presentation with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement reminds us that colonialization is an enduring reality, and Boston University sits on the stolen lands of the traditional people of the Massachusetts tribe. If you are outside of Boston, take some time to learn about the tribal lands where you live and the ongoing movements to have land honored, acknowledged, and returned. Here in Boston, there is an Indigenous Peoples March on Saturday, October 9th at 11:30 at the Park Street Station. This year has been a year like no other, with COVID unmasking the devastating long-term effects of structural racism, classism, and gender inequality. The timing of Tarso Ramos' talk couldn't be more appropriate for our historical moment when we, as social workers, part of our world community, stand at a crossroad. The January 6th insurrection was not the swan song of Trumpism. That rebellion against the prospect of transformational multiracial democracy continues in state houses across the country, where attacks on critical race theory, trans athletes, reproductive autonomy, and election integrity provide both the narrative foundation and legislative roadmap for authoritarianism, American style. What are the drivers of this crisis? And what are the opportunities for building a more just society in our time? Our speaker tonight, Tarso Luís Ramos, is the Executive Director of Political Research Associates and has been researching and challenging the US right wing for more than 25 years. At PRA, Tarso has launched major initiatives on antisemitism, misogyny, authoritarianism, white nationalism, law enforcement, the far right, and other threats to democracy. His work has been featured in The Guardian, The New York Times, and Time Magazine, among other outlets. Before joining PRA in 2006, Tarso served as the founding director of Western States Center's Racial Justice Program and exposed and challenged corporate anti-environmental campaigns as the director of the Wise Use Public Exposure Project. He recently served as an activist in residence at the Barnard Center for the Study of Women and was Rockwood Leadership Institute National Yearlong Fellow. I have been lucky enough to hear Tarso speak on numerous occasions, and I always learn something new each time. It's a privilege for us at BUSSW to have him here. Please join me in welcoming our BUSSW Equity and Inclusion speaker and my camarada in the struggle for justice, Tarso Luís Ramos.
Thank you so much, Don, for that very warm introduction. Boa tarde, buenas tardes, good afternoon to all who are here in this strangely virtual way. Don, based on the introductions you made and the description of previous speakers, I can tell that I'm in the right place. And I'm very honored to be here, not least because I'm very familiar with your work, Don, in the community. And if that represents in any way or shape or form the commitment that you infuse within this department, I'm sure that I'm in very good company. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Tarso Luís Ramos. I'm the executive director of PRA, which is a national organization based in the Boston area. We're based in Somerville when we are able to make it to the office, which has been not so much recently for reasons I think we would all understand. I'm going to thank in advance the students that are going to be helping me with this presentation by advancing slides. So I hope that we could start with the first slide. And I'm going to be using these as visual aids for hopefully not too long a talk, and then I look forward to some discussion with you all. Will I be able to see the slides, my own slides? Are they up now? Because I only see myself. I'm wondering if there's another view that I need. Fantastic. Thank you. So we can advance to the next slide. I'll just say, Don already introduced me a little bit in my organization and that embarrassingly long bio that our communications department wrote for me. So I'll just say a little bit about myself personally. I'm Brazilian born. I came to the United States. My parents brought me here when I was very young. We had to get out of Brazil because of a military coup backed by the United States. And so I grew up with the lived experience of watching a liberal democracy collapse, in this case, under the context of military rule and authoritarianism. And so my preoccupation with authoritarianism comes naturally. And I suppose it's not too surprising that somebody who comes from that background ended up becoming executive director of an organization that monitors anti-democratic threats and works with social justice movements that range from labor unions to the movement for Black Lives to better understand their opposition and to build more power for transformational democracy in the United States. So I kind of come back by this orientation honestly. Could I have the next slide, please? You know, there's been a lot of talk, and I've been asked to do a lot of public speaking around the January 6th attempted coup, insurrection, and so forth. And I think to the observant person, it's clear that the kind of crisis that we're in the United States and globally didn't erupt on January 6th. It didn't begin on January 6th. It's been coming in many ways for a long time. Some of my colleagues use the term syndemic to describe what we're in right now. A syndemic, multiple epidemics or crises of climate, of the economy, of the political system that we're in, and of course a health global pandemic crisis as well. We're living all these things simultaneously, and with the exception perhaps of the COVID-19 pandemic, these are not new occurrences. They're trend lines that have been building for a long time. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to step outside a little bit of the context of the United States in order to get some perspective on what's happening here and what we might do about it. Next slide. But I do want to acknowledge that it's impossible in the United States to have this conversation without talking about the phenomenon of Trumpism, right? And the ongoing corrosive influence on democratic institutions and norms in the United States. Trump has come to represent this kind of crisis of legitimacy of the political and economic system in the United States. And while of course there's a lot about Trumpism that's idiosyncratic to the US, in many ways Trumpism is a reflection of larger international trends. And so I want to talk about that. I want to ease into that by giving a few examples. The whole notion of the big lie, the stop the steal notion that somehow the elections were rigged. This is not just unique to the United States, it's now migrated. It's been adopted by Brazil's aspiring autocrat, Jair Bolsonaro, and Germany's far-right party, the AfD. Trump's accusations that Jewish philanthropist George Soros was financing a southern invasion of the United States by dark-skinned migrants is an anti-Semitic campaign that he borrowed from Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban, who literally ran Soros and an entire university and other things out of the country of Hungary. Trump's defense of white nationalists and fascists who rallied in Charlottesville in 2017 and subsequently the Proud Boys and others, and his simultaneous cultivation of Christian nationalists, whether through stacking the federal courts with judges handpicked by Mike Pence's wing of the party, or Education Secretary Betsy DeVos's attacks on Title IX. This cultivation of both racial nationalists and religious nationalists has become a hallmark of sort of the rise of authoritarianism globally. And so it leads us to ask the question, what's going on? What are the broader trend lines? Can I have the next slide? Indeed, this is a global phenomenon. We see it in Hungary and Turkey and Russia and Brazil again, after 24 years of a liberal democracy there, and so many other states, from Milan to Manila, from Berlin to Brasilia, from Warsaw to Washington, DC, we see authoritarian leaders, parties, and movements on the rise. So there is a deep global crisis in the legitimacy of liberal and neoliberal political and economic systems, and the far right across the globe has taken advantage of that to explain the reasons for that, to offer explanations for that, and to mobilize and build momentum towards decidedly anti-democratic aims. And I want to talk just give a few additional trend lines. If we could have the next slide. This is a map adapted from an institute called VDEM, which is housed at a university in Sweden, University of Gothenburg, from their 2020 report, talking about autocratization, the rise of autocracies or more authoritarian systems around the globe. And the redder the states are here on this globe, the more in the direction of authoritarianism these countries are going, based on a multivalent index system that they've created. This is a pretty liberal institution. This is not a radical research enterprise. It's one that's used by the World Bank and by other global institutions that are not always forces for transformational democratic change. So even within the world of fairly centrist institutions, there's a recognition that authoritarianism is on the march around the globe. Next slide. Indeed, according to, oh, I'm sorry, you may have to hit through the bullet points here. According to the 2020 report, VDEM found that for the first time since the turn of the century, most countries on the planet are authoritarian or autocratic, coming to represent a majority of the global population. With some examples on here in terms of Hungary or India, which is really leaning more towards neo-fascism on the Indian subcontinent. Just a year later, this same institute, again, fairly centrist institute, published a follow-up report which found that now 68% of the global population were living under autocracies or authoritarian states. So this is a phenomenon that's happening It's widespread, and it's also happening very quickly around the globe. Next slide, please. No country is the same, so one needs to be really careful about overgeneralization, but I do want to suggest that we can identify some common elements that are driving liberal democracies towards authoritarianism. Let's consider 3 drivers that are present in robust form virtually anywhere around the globe where we see the rise of nationalism and authoritarianism, or see democratic states in sustained crisis. One is severe economic inequality, by which I mean the transfer and concentration of wealth upwards into fewer and fewer hands, creating hardship and resentment, and bending politics to the will of corporate and financial oligarchies. The statistics in the United States are incredible in this regard. The most concentrated wealth that we've seen since the Gilded Age of the Roaring 20s that led to the stock market crash, for instance, in 1929. But globally, we see this as a trend line. The second is the rise of religious nationalism and theocratic movements. These bring a lot of misogyny, homophobia and transphobia, religious intolerance into culture and politics, whether it's a Hindu right in India, the evangelical right in Brazil or the United States, the Christian Orthodox right in Russia. These movements have provided a mass base for repressive politics and demanded of rising autocratic or aspiring autocratic leaders that they incorporate patriarchy and traditional gender norms and politics that restrict the autonomy of genderqueer people and women as part of a national platform. And the third is the rise of racial and ethnic nationalist movements and parties that define the nation, the people, in racist and other exclusionary ways. Sometimes those things overlap, like with the Hindu nationalism, where there's both a religious and an ethnic identity that's accorded to Hinduism. So I have a colleague who works in the European Union context who looked at it this way. It's as if there's a different bartender in each of these places that's mixing these same 3 ingredients. So with different proportions, maybe a little bit more corporate power and oligarchy, maybe a little bit more racial nationalism, or a little bit more religious or theocratic tendencies. But it's a terrible drink, in any instance. And these elements seem always to be present. Next slide. So why am I using this framework of authoritarianism, and what do I mean by it? I'm going to draw on the work of political philosopher Juan Lintz, who describes authoritarianism as a system of government characterized by highly concentrated and centralized power that uses political parties and mass organizations to mobilize people around goals of the regime. It's distinct from, and if I could have the next slide, it's distinct from either totalitarianism, the classic models of which are Nazi Germany, or the worst phases of Stalinism in the former Soviet Union, where there was really the elimination of rival institutions and kind of an erosion of a distinction between private and public life. On the one hand, a democracy, an actual democracy, not just a nominal democracy, in which potentially there's unlimited pluralism, right? The unlimited engagement and participation of communities, of identities, in the polis, in the people. Authoritarianism is something in between. There's limited pluralism that concentrates power in the hands of a ruler or a small group, oftentimes attempting to maintain the appearance of democracy. There may be labor unions. There may be independent institutions that haven't been created by the ruling regime, but at the end of the day, everyone understands that what the limits of dissent are, and the regime is able to perpetuate itself without truly participatory elections, right? It's able to sustain itself. Could I have the next slide, please? To those 3 key drivers, I do want to just acknowledge there are a lot of other dynamics going on: demographic change, increasing inequality, change in cultural norms, existential threats, climate change I mentioned earlier. These are all additional drivers of authoritarianism, in the sense that they create either crises that the aspiring autocrat can take advantage, but also mobilize conservative impulses in the population that's sensing a significant threat. Massive technological change could be another driver of this. Next slide, please. I want to focus, though, specifically on demographic change as a key motivator for the rise of authoritarian movements in the United States, particularly the role of racial fear in the United States. Of course, the US was, very formally speaking, a white supremacist country at its founding, right? And only with the post-Civil War amendments and really since the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act brought through by the Black freedom struggle in the United States 100 years later, have we begun to approach something that you could call really a nominal democracy in the United States. But recently, demographic change in the United States has provoked a kind of racial fear and backlash that aspiring autocrats have been able to mobilize to their advantage. And really since 2016, we've seen not just a proportionate, but the absolute decline of white people as currently defined. It's an unstable, whiteness is a very unstable category. Lots of people included in it, like Catholics who at one point weren't, but whiteness is currently constituted. That population is declining now in not only relative, but in absolute numbers in the United States, which is something that it has been, again, a key issue around which aspiring autocrats are mobilizing. Can I have the next slide? So with that, I do want to bring it back a little bit to the United States in the January 6th insurrection. It's kind of a kicking off point for the next phase of this talk. I think there's a widespread sense that the insurrectionists really represented organized white nationalist and other far-right groups. And indeed, there were many organizations, there were many people there who were representatives of groups like the Proud Boys. There were some openly fascist organizations that had representatives there. But it's quite telling when we look at the arrest records of those who breached the Capitol, for instance. What we find of the 500 plus people who were arrested there is that really only about 13% of them have any traceable ties to organized far-right groups, right? The majority of them didn't have those kinds of ties, nor did they represent the kind of stereotype that we often hear in the media about who is a member of our far-right organizations in the United States. There's a kind of liberal characterization of members of far-right groups as economically underprivileged or struggling, downwardly mobile, maybe largely unemployed, socially isolated from the mainstream, a variety of these kinds of characterizations. What we found were most of the insurrectionists were relatively well off relative to the rest of the population in the United States. Many of them were business owners. Many of them made well above the median incomes in the United States. Were doing quite well, actually, but were called into action for a number of different reasons. And because of the limits of time, I'm not going to talk about all of them here, but notable, a study out of the Chicago Project, which is rooted at the University of Chicago, found that the greatest indicator of probability of showing up at that insurrection and being arrested, which is to say being actively involved in the insurrection and committing crimes that resulted in your arrest, was that you came from a county in the United States that has declining white populations relative to the other populations. In fact, many of the people who came and participated in the insurrection were not only fairly well off, they were often in purple states or blue leaning in the sense of Republican, Democrat leaning counties, but where there's a sense that they have a sense that Black and brown people are taking over and they feel threatened by that shift. And indeed, polling indicates that many of the folks who were in support of the insurrection believe a number of things, including that it's now advantageous socially, economically. It's more advantageous to be a Black person in the United States than it is to be a white person in the United States. Now, we can talk more about that, but that is by no indicator, by no indicator, health, income, wealth, longevity, we could go on. Is it advantageous to be a Black person in the United States relative to being a white person? But this impression is a key part of what's driving this notion that Black and brown people are replacing white folks who constitute the real nation in the United States. Next slide, please. And with this, I'm going to ask kind of a sobering question, which is what democracy, and I'm going to put that in quotes, right? What democracy has survived the transition from a national majority to becoming a minority? And the relatively short period of human history in which the modern nation state is the principal form of political organization, it's hard to find examples in which this transition is survived. When the dominant racial, ethnic, or religious group becomes a numerical minority and perceives their power slipping for that reason, more typically, we find contests for power. We find the weakening of democratic institutions. We often find the rise of political violence, sometimes the rise of armed militias. Lebanon would be a good example of this when as the Christian majority became a minority. And in some ways, we need to look no further than the history of the United States itself. If we look at the end of the Civil War, in the Reconstruction period, in the promise of an actual multiracial democracy for the first time in the United States, we see a very short period of experimentation across the South. We see African Americans elected not only to state legislatures, but for the first time to the US Senate from places like Mississippi. And very quickly on the heels of this, we see the rise of racial terrorism. We see political violence, we see community level violence, and we see the rise of the Democratic Party in the South is a kind of one-party racial dictatorship that rules for about 75 years and is able to dictate national policy on many issues for a very long time. So within the history of the United States, we see what can happen in terms of racial reaction to the possibility of multiracial democracy. Next slide, please. So just out of a concern for time, I'm gonna breeze through probably some of these slides because, but the main idea here is to build on this idea that when we think about the rise of the far right or anti-democratic movements, it's not only a question of how many individuals are affiliated with specific far right organizations, it's a question of what portion of the population supports the worldview in the kind of policy and other sorts of interventions that the far right or anti-democratic movements are calling for. And so it's interesting to see that by polling, and this goes back a number of months now, the number of people who believe that the election was stolen, but violence to change that result is not justified. It's about 74 million people in the United States, very large block. And then probably there's something more like 10 million or 4% of the population that actually believes that violence is justified in order to achieve a different result. Next slide. Another way of thinking about the kind of ecosystems that we have in the United States or the scale of anti-democratic or far-right movements is we have about 74 million Trump voters, which I think is a pretty good indicator of folks who are have been effectively mobilized by a politics of racial grievance in the United States. Certainly not all Trump voters would say that that was their principal motivation. There certainly are others. But Trump is a good stand-in for the kind of far-right politician that we see across the European theater, to some extent that we see in emerging South America, the Asian Pacific and other places. And so it's a reasonable indicator of the level of strength in voting terms for far-right politics in the United States. Within that, in terms of getting harder right, there are about 24 million people who believe in this notion of a deep state conspiracy that is run by pedophiles who control the Democratic Party and are able to manipulate the outcome of global politics and indeed the outcome of the last election, sort of the QAnon and its spin-off conspiracy theories. And then there's a smaller concentric circle, which I mentioned earlier, just a moment ago in the previous slide. There may be about, within those who believe that violence is justified to achieve a different outcome electorally or politically in terms of policy, there's probably a smaller number, 4 million, who are potential insurgents, who are affiliated with far-right groups, who have advocated for violence and so forth. And then the actual number of members of far-right organizations, ranging from, say, the Proud Boys to the National Socialist Movement in the United States, neo-Nazi organization, it's really only in the 30 to 50,000 range. So there's a mass base for pretty far-right politics, but the infrastructure for far-right organizations is actually very small relative to that larger base. Could I have the next slide, please? So one of the things that I think is most disturbing, if we look at the post-insurrection period, there was a brief moment, maybe 48 hours or so, in which we saw a possibility of rejecting the politics of insurrectionism, rejecting the base of support for that kind of politics from within one of the major parties. We heard Mitch McConnell make noises about rejecting and calling for accountability for the insurrectionists, for throwing the sort of Trump wing of the party out, the nationalist, the ultra-nationalist wing of the party out. That lasted for a very short period of time. And what we have seen is a regrouping of one of the major parties in the United States around this kind of politics of grievance. And I would argue a politics that is now set on a course of minority rule. And in this country, in this party, we mean white minority rule as an extension of that. And so just as 25, 30 years ago, the Christian right, Christian nationalists in this country built a vehicle within the Republican Party in ways that transformed its politics, that led it from a party that in many cases was standing up for reproductive freedoms, for a party, frankly, that voted in Congress in greater numbers in support of civil rights legislation in the 60s than the Democratic Party was able to do at that time because of the Dixiecrat faction, into a party in which it is it's an article of faith that you're against the reproductive autonomy of women, that you're against the full civil rights and liberties of gay, lesbian, transgender, gender nonconforming individuals in this country and so forth. In a similar pattern, the ideology of white nationalism has entered into the party and is now finding a sustained place within that party. And I would argue that the kinds of legislative attacks that Don was talking about at the very beginning of this talk, the attacks on so-called critical race theory, which is just another way of saying, making an argument that white people are disadvantaged and that any kind of critical historical inquiry with respect to systemic racism in this country is regarded as unacceptable and unpatriotic. That kind of attack, the attack on gender nonconforming and queer people in this country that we see at the state level, the attacks on migrants to the United States, that these things have become the pillars, both narratively and to some extent legislatively, for a politic of white minority rule, with, of course, the attacks on voting rights and efforts to change the voting system is the linchpin in all of that. Next slide, please. I do want to make it really clear that this is not just a partisan question. And actually, if I were to return to the drivers of authoritarianism in the United States and globally, I would add, as I am here, securitization, the tendency to treat threats to the ruling political system is ones that require national security responses. And this has been as true of the Democratic Party of the United States as as it's been of the Republican Party of the United States for a long time. I'll draw an analogy here to the critique that the Movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter makes to the idea that policing is the way that we achieve security at a community level, as opposed to making investments in health and education and infrastructure, and in a people's economy such that there's not the need for economic crimes and so forth. There's a similar set of a question here at the national level, where dissent is treated as a national security threat, whether that's coming from the left, more traditionally in the United States, or whether it's coming from the right. What we see is a pattern where, if I could start with in the mid-90s with the Oklahoma City bombing, where threats that become violent and violence that's directed against the state, as opposed to violence that's directed against communities of color, for instance, in the United States, tend to provoke legislation and policies of national security. So we get the 1996 terrorism and immigration laws that are ostensibly about responding to the rise of armed white militias in the United States, but in fact really are used to erode the Fourth Amendment freedoms of Black and brown people in the United States, and ultimately are reactivated after the 2001 terrorism attacks on the Twin Towers in New York. Similarly, after that attack, we get the Patriot Act, which similarly is justified in the context of a national security threat to the United States, but is but is deployed most robustly to police Black and brown people, particularly Muslim communities in the United States. And so this impulse towards securitization is very strong globally, including in the United States. And this includes reorganizing the business model of major corporations like Amazon and Palantir and others to base their business models on facial recognition, on mass surveillance, and other kinds of technologies that are marketed to the state, to the government, as a means of keeping us safe, but that result in more surveillance and more policing that results in lack of safety. So these are some of the dynamics that we're experiencing in the United States and globally. And I wanted to pivot and just talk a little bit about, okay, all right, great, that's heavy. So what do we do about some of this? And I want to recognize that, first of all, democracy movements, whether they call themselves that or not, are also growing globally. That same VDEM report from 2020 that talked about the growing, the spread of autocracies and authoritarianism and the growing percent of the global population living under these regimes, also spoke about the widespread pro-democracy movements around the globe, noting that a share of countries with substantial pro-democracy mass protests rose from 27% in 2009 to 44% in 2019. And we've certainly seen that in the United States. The historic racial justice protests that involved somewhere on the order of 70 million people over the course of the last year is a very good example of that trend. And so there is contestation. There is contestation in this crisis, in this period of crisis, for the future direction of this society and many societies around the globe. Next slide. At the risk of oversimplifying, oh, I'm sorry, the slide after this one. At the risk of oversimplifying, we're somehow skipping a slide in there, but can we go back? There we are, perfect. Hold. No, you had it, the response to the crises. Thank you. In a general sense, I would say we have a choice either between more democracy, more justice, more solidarity, and really trying to transform this notion of who is we the people, who is the people that government is accountable to, right? Not only that government is accountable to, but indeed have the right to govern, to self-govern. From one that traditionally has been rooted in the colonial experience of the settler colonial experience of the United States, into the reality of a multiracial and feminist democracy in the United States, because there is no democracy without feminism. And indeed, if I could have the next slide, it's a moment, if I could call upon a couple of influential commentators. Here are two quotes. One is from Gita Sen, who's an economist, who notes that we're living in a fierce world in which many social contracts have been broken, with huge increases in inequality, but new players and powers are emerging, yet the old order is not giving way. And to those who are familiar with the political theorist Antonio Gramsci of the middle of the last century, this notion that the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born, producing a time of monsters. And indeed, we are living in a time of monsters. Monsters in the form of rising racial and ethnic movements, nationalist movements, monsters in the sense of rising dictators and aspiring dictators around the globe, but we're also living in this period of contestation. Next slide. And one of the things that's most notable about this period of contestation is around the globe, women are in the leadership of mass democracy movements. Whether this is in Poland or in my birth country of Brazil or in Argentina, like which is this image here with the solidarity a sign of Elinao. It's a commentary on the rise of Bolsonaro in Brazil in this particular instance, or whether it's in the Rojovan liberated territory of Syria, whether it's in the United States, where the leadership of racial justice uprisings is largely being led by queer, Black, and brown women in this country who may not frame what they're doing as a feminist pro-democracy movement, but is in fact representing an intersectional feminist transformational democratic movement in the United States. And so it's at a moment of tremendous opportunity for contest. And where I want to end before turning this over for questions and comments is to offer a few just principles for thinking about our engagement in this period. What I would say that we are all historical actors now, right? If ever you've had a sense that somehow engagement in political and social processes is inconsequential to the political and social future of the place that you live in, this is not that time. This is a time in which our agency has particular import and where relatively small organized groups can have exceptional influence in the world. And some principles that guide PRA's work as we work with social justice movements is this notion of asserting an alternative, multiracial, feminist, and religiously plural notion of we the people, owning that we are the people of this place. The second is to be really serious about blocking the far right's consolidation of power over government and civic institutions, the courts, law enforcement, civic space, a digital space that we all organize within or just conduct our communications through. And the third is to build deep solidarity in feminist multiracial democratic practice. We have this notion of blocking and building. We have to block the further consolidation of power by far-right forces in order to have the political space to build transformational democratic possibilities within formal politics, but at the community level, within our family structures, within our institutions, within our educational institutions. Really, we have a choice here where you will either have some version of authoritarianism, more corporate dominated, more religiously nationalist, more religiously, racially nationalist, or some version of an actual transformational, multiracial feminist democracy. And it seems to me that our jobs as members of this society is to make sure the second category is the category that we're living into in the future. I know I've gone long. My apologies for that, Dawn, and I look forward to questions and dialogue with your colleagues now.
Wow, Tarso, knocked it out of the park again. I appreciated the building of the bigger we, because I think so many of us as social workers are all about that. I would like to introduce our first reflector, the wonderful Greer Hamilton. Greer is a third-year PhD student candidate at the School of Social Work, and her research is broadly focused on racial justice, the built environment, and health.
Thank you so much for your talk, Tarso. This is my first time hearing you speak, and it was just really insightful, and I'm interested in learning more about authoritarianism. I guess I have a question about the last, or your first principle that you were just talking about asserting this principle of we the people. And I'm just curious how you see like social workers and social work educators being able to assert that.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question, and lovely to meet you, Greer, and good luck with your work. I think that there is such an important role for social workers in this moment and in this work. For one, I think that the transition to a caring economy, to a more just society, requires an investment in the social infrastructure of this country in ways that we've probably never seen. We've certainly never seen for populations beyond, right? A Christian white population that has been held up is the actual nation, the true nation, the true population of this country. But I think there are many other ways. I think that this is a period of tremendous struggle and trauma and difficulty for many populations. As Dawn said in her introduction, this pandemic has laid bare and exacerbated and accelerated profound inequalities that social workers are in a position to engage and address. I also frankly think that there are huge mental health challenges within our communities and within our social justice movements that are seldom attended to. There's not much of a safety net, as we know, in this country, right? There's not much of an investment in mental health. And so I think both within the formal mechanisms of public health, but frankly, also within the communal and mutual aid arrangements of social justice movements, there's tremendous need for the work that trained social workers can bring. Indeed, I've unfortunately seen examples where the lack of access to mental health services can make our movements vulnerable and fall prey to really unhealthy mechanisms or marketed ways of going about attending to one's social and spiritual and emotional mental health needs. And so I think never has there been a time that the kind of work that you are doing is more important.
Thank you.